Well, welcome to the Healthy Heart Summit. I'm your host, Dr. Stephen Masley, and this is your opportunity to learn from international experts on topics that impact you and your loved ones and how to prevent and reverse heart disease. And today I'm really happy with our invited speaker. We have here today Randy Hartnell, the president of Vital Choice Wild Seafood and Organics, which he founded back in 2001 with his wife, Carla. Prior to that, he was a commercial fisherman, which I really want to talk to him about. And he's living in his Washington State native area now, Bellingham, Washington, close to where I'm from. So we're almost like, in my past life, would have been neighbors. So I'm really glad you're here. This is a great topic, I think, that relates to how to prevent and reverse heart disease. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Masley. It's a real pleasure to be here today.
So let's start with your background. You started as a fisherman, and what a great introduction to a topic about seafood and heart health. So tell us about that transition from fisherman to Vital Choice to making a difference in people's lives.
Okay, well, it all started back when I was a college student going to Berkeley, getting an English degree, and never had any thoughts of becoming a fisherman, but I landed a summer job in Alaska on a fishing boat, and continued to go up there every summer. The money was great. It was wonderful working out in nature. It's such an unusual, primal experience.
And hard work.
And it's hard work. It's very physical, and it's kind of the opposite spectrum from academia. So my original plan had been to go to graduate school. But by the time that rolled around and I'd graduated with my English degree, I had fallen in love with fishing in Alaska. And so I, to make a long story short, bought my own boat, hired my own crews, and over the course of the next 20 years, bought several more boats, hired more crews, became a full-time fisherman. And I just loved it. It was a great livelihood. There's something about sort of feeding the tribe. It's very primal, and I loved that. And I did it up until about the late 90s, when it was kind of an upheaval in our industry. Alaska is known for having some of the best managed fisheries in the world. They've got pristine habitat, and as a result, they've got these fabulous salmon runs. I mean, just millions and millions of salmon come back every year. And but the thing is that farm salmon came on the scene in a big way, and in a very short period of time, displaced wild salmon in the markets. There were just a lot of things appealing to the retail, to grocery stores, to chefs about farm salmon. It was available year-round. It was cheaper. It was cosmetically perfect, and offered a lot of advantages over wild salmon. Nobody was really paying attention to the nutritional differences or the environmental differences at that time. So basically our prices collapsed, and in a very short period of time, I could no longer make a living. I could catch a lot of salmon, was very good at it by that time, but they just weren't worth anything. And so myself and thousands of other fishermen, family fishermen, had to go find something else to do. And that's something else for me. It's kind of a long story, but it became Vital Choice. I basically started Vital Choice as a way to connect this incredible resources, wonderful, nutritious fish, sustainable fish, with people in America that have no access to it.
Right.
And that's what Vital Choice has continued to do for the last 12 years. We take a lot of pride in sourcing the very best quality fish and shipping it to our people's, our customers' doorsteps.
Well, we're going to come back to farm-raised fish in a little bit, because I want to talk about that with you. But first, let's talk about purity and contaminants, because those are very important considerations that we should touch on for our listeners here today.
Yeah, that is one of the biggest questions we get. The most common questions we get is, people see the headlines about mercury toxicity in seafood, or the last couple of years, it's been radiation poisoning from the tragedy in Japan. And so from an early on in our company, we took this very seriously, and we eat more of our own fish than anybody. So we want to source product that is obviously clean and safe and healthy. And so we started testing our fish. And I just, over the years, have learned an awful lot about this subject. I've attended a lot of scientific conferences, got to know some of the world's foremost experts on the whole topic. And essentially, yes, there is mercury in fish, but it kind of goes to the dose makes the poison, as I'm sure you're familiar. And the thing is, methyl mercury has been in the ocean environment forever. A lot of it comes from erosion from land. A lot of it comes from underwater volcanic activity.
And now from coal-fired energy plants.
Right. And so actually, life evolved in the ocean amid a background of mercury, and we've developed a way to handle a certain amount of it. And the bottom line is you want to stick to seafood species that are on the smaller end of the spectrum, lower on the food chain, and they're going to have the negligible amounts.
Well, you may not know it, but I've actually published multiple papers on mercury in seafood intake and their impact on brain function. So I really like salmon. I look at it in mouth size. The bigger the mouth, the larger they eat in the food chain, and the higher the mercury levels. And salmon is a big fish, but it's got a little mouth, and it eats mostly shrimp. So the mercury levels are almost non-detectable.
That's right. And,
shellfish has almost none. So now if you're talking grouper, tuna, snapper, bass, swordfish, those are big mouth fish. They're all pretty, and tunas are just so aggressive. They can potentially be very high in mercury, but I think salmon, sole, cod, shellfish, there's almost no mercury there, right?
That's right. There are 5 basic species, salmon species, and 3 of them really don't eat any. They eat at the bottom of the food chain, and plus they don't live very long. A pink salmon only lives 2 years,
right?
And it eats basically just algae and krill, and so it's got great healthy fats. It's got very little methyl mercury. And then there have been, the biggest studies, which you may be familiar with, the Alsbach study in UK and the Seychelles Island study, and they're big, robust studies looking at thousands of people who eat tons of seafood. The Seychelles, they eat 15 times as much seafood as the average American. I've been watching this population of mothers and their offspring for 30 years, and no negative effects. And really
we're talking wild fish. We're not talking farm raised where it might be rated in polluted waters or fed contaminated food. So I would totally agree. So in wild fish, the purity and contaminate, especially for the species we're going to be talking about, its purity is really much less of an issue.
Yeah, so, Stephen, if I could just make one last point there, because I think it's a very profound, critically important point.
All right.
The Alsbach study in the UK looked at 14,000 mother-infant pairs, followed them for 20 years, expected fully that the women who ate the most seafood when they were pregnant would have kids with the most developmental problems. And when they were all said and done, this was published in The Lancet, I think, in 2009 or 10, the conclusion of the investigators was advice to pregnant women to limit seafood consumption actually caused the harm it was intended.
Well, omega-3 deficiency. You want those omega-3 fats for a baby's brain. They're really good for babies and all of us, not just children, but everybody.
Absolutely.
It's that balance. Yeah. So what about sustainability? We hear a lot about sustainability in the oceans today. Let's touch on that, because I know to you that's a very important thing for you and your company.
This is one of my favorite topics because it's so important. And think about seafood, compared to, one fellow I was listening to, a fisheries expert from the University of Washington, Dr. Ray Hilborn, was making the point that not only is seafood one of the healthiest foods, heart healthy, brain healthy foods, but it is also one of the most sustainable, potentially. Think of another food that doesn't require any fresh water to be grown. It doesn't require land. We don't have to be bulldozing rainforests to grow crops to feed cattle, and almost no greenhouse gases. And just about however you look at seafood, it's one of the most sustainable foods out there. Now, there are some fisheries around the world that are not being managed sustainably, but the trend is actually very positive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, as long as you're picking the right species. How about what are some of the species you would encourage people to try to stay away from because they're not sustainable? Which come to mind for you?
Well, the sort of the biggest ones now are the large tuna.
Bluefin tuna.
They're just so incredibly valuable that there's a lot of pirating going on. And On the other side of the spectrum, I would recommend that people searching for seafood, look to there are these seafood wallet cards or wallet seafood guides. Monterey Bay Aquarium has an excellent one. The Marine Stewardship Council is
Right,
probably
Monterey
the
Aquarium. I
best.
love that little card they have, and you can go
Yes.
online and pull that up too. That's a great one.
And it's really a good news story because in the last 2 or 3 years, more and more of the big retailers are really getting on board and saying, look, we're only going to sell sustainable seafood. And even some of the big shipping lines like Maersk has jumped on board and said, we're only going to transport fish that we know is sustainable. And so there's really a lot that's happened just in the last 4 or 5 years because what happens is if all of a sudden you're not if you're not catching fish in a manageable, responsible way, a responsible way, you're losing your markets. And Walmart, Target, Safeway, I mean, those are three.
They're all looking into this now. It's great. So
it's
how about the farmed versus wild? I mean, it's a big health issue. Most people don't think of the health implications on whether they're choosing wild or farm fish. So let's go through that a little bit.
So people ask me about that a lot. And the first thing I want to say is I am not anti-aquaculture. I think there is good aquaculture and not so good.
Absolutely.
Shellfish, clams, mussels, oysters, fantastic food source and very sustainable, very healthy, good fats and all of that, micronutrients. But farmed salmon is a different story. Farmed salmon, for the most part, are farmed in these net pens that are open to the marine environment. They pollute the environment. They're fed a lot of food that salmon was never intended to eat, a lot of grains. And so it's really.
But we're also feeding them pesticide-enriched grains. So you have to worry about the dioxin levels, pesticide levels. They're being fed antibiotics in these pens to keep them going and keep them alive.
Yeah. Farmed salmon are fed more antibiotics per pound than any other livestock by a wide margin. And that's one of the biggest reasons that some of these gold standard environmental organizations rate them as an avoid.
And really the best part of wild seafood, besides the protein, is these long-chain omega-3s that we're going to talk about that are so good for us.
Yeah.
And frequently, those content levels are very low in farm salmon.
That's interesting in farm salmon. Most farm salmon does have omega-3 fats at a fair amount. In fact, sometimes more than in wild salmon. But what's happening is that the food that they have to be fed in order to have those healthy fats is getting more and more expensive. And also, as you referred to it earlier, it's when they're rendering all the sardines and anchovies and concentrating them, they're also concentrating the contaminants.
Yes.
And the only way to lower those is to feed them less of that. So it's cheaper to feed them grain. They're not getting as many omega-3s. What they're getting is a lot of omega-6s. So whereas a wild sockeye salmon may have 9 omega-3s for every omega-6, a farm salmon is on average, and this doesn't necessarily apply to every single farm salmon in the world, but on average is about 1 to 1. So if your goal is to increase your ratio of omega-3s to omega-1s, wild salmon is a much better choice.
Absolutely. So, and yes, you could feed your salmon herring and things like that, but frequently the cost of that is prohibitive, and they end up being fed corn and soy and other things. So, it is possible. I agree with you. You can certainly have healthy farm-raised salmon, but to me it just seems far and few between.
Well, and the other side of like I said earlier, that the biggest problem with farm salmon, in my view, is well, of course, the nutritional part is important, but they're an environmental nightmare, especially right up here in British Columbia. They've located these salmon farms right on the migration paths of the wild salmon. So in the fall, you've got these little, or spring, I'm sorry, in the spring, you've got these little salmon smolt that are hatching, coming down out of the rivers, and they've got to make their way out into the ocean and go through this gauntlet of salmon farms. And they pick up all kinds of parasites, diseases.
Right. And
if you look in Norway, Scotland, places where they've been farming salmon the longest, they've essentially wiped out their wild salmon runs. And that's happening here. One scientist that I talked to basically said that we're crazy to be raising farm salmon in an area where we still have 5 different wild salmon species. It's just insane.
So what about the health benefits? We hear about these, but let's focus in on them because there's many benefits to adding more seafood in our diet, and I think many people miss out on that. Like brain food. Why do we call this brain food?
Well, as you probably know, wild salmon and other sources of cold water seafood are the very best sources of these long chain omega-3 fats, and every synapse in our brain needs these molecules to function properly. Our eyes need them, and there's just nothing that can compare. There's no vegetable source omega-3 fat. That's one area of confusion, as you're probably aware.
It's a big area of confusion. People think they're going to get these beneficial fats from soy or flax, and at most they're going to convert 5% of it, at most.
That's right. Walnuts, and they do have some of the short omega-3.
But those don't have the benefit. So our brain is 40% fish oil by weight. I mean, I love that statistic because it just shows how we've grown up for 100,000 years eating seafood, and it's an intricate part of our brain. But it lowers inflammation, it improves our cholesterol profile, helps blood sugar, we're less achy. I mean, heck, I eat salmon and seafood, because it helps my joints feel better. So,
well, it makes sense. When I was first starting the company, and I didn't even know what an omega-3 was, but I had a serendipitous thing happen. We were invited to a party at our neighbor's house, and new people had moved into town. It turned out he was a genetics professor at Western Washington University, just up the street. And he asked me what I did, and I was still fishing at that time, and he got all excited and proceeded to tell me why salmon was such an incredible food. He said, every cell in our body needs those molecules. They're just, these long-chain omega-3s are these incredibly bioactive molecules that just have so many, countless functions in our body. And so, and he went on to tell me about how he'd had 3 different serious health problems. And when he learned about this and he started eating seafood every day, they basically just went away. And,
so if we're going to try to get more, and not all the wild species are available year-round, let's talk about alternatives. Instead of just always trying to buy fresh, what other options are out there that I think of that you would say are equally healthy?
Yeah, well, that's a really great point or great question. This whole idea of fresh versus frozen versus canned. Now, Vital Trends, we do not sell any fresh salmon for a variety of reasons. It's seafood is so incredibly perishable, and those, as healthy and fantastic as those omega-3 fats are, they're highly unsaturated, which basically means as soon as they're exposed to air, they start oxidizing.
They go rancid.
That's what we know as fishiness. And what's really been amazing to me over the years is just, I've probably talked to thousands of people. We go out at conferences and shows, and we'll set up our booth and we'll cook our salmon for people. And it's amazing how many people really think that fish is supposed to taste fishy. And what's happened is somewhere along in their early part of their life or at some earlier point, they ate some seafood and it tasted bad, and they just concluded that that's the way seafood tasted. And so you have, I think, millions of people out there.
Millions who don't like seafood because they've been given bad quality seafood. They don't really, I think most people don't even know what awesome seafood tastes like.
One of my favorite moments is when we talk somebody. What I'll do is I'll say, I'll put $1 out on the counter. I'll say, I'll bet you $1 if you try this piece of salmon that you'll love it. And I've never lost $1, I swear. And
but here's the when you buy what we call fresh in the grocery store, it could have been on ice for a week or 10 days, right?
Or longer. I've been in Hawaii and watched the tuna boats come in, and they. This one conversation I had with a fellow, he was saying, "Oh, we would never sell frozen fish. We only sell fresh." But the boat's been out for 3 weeks. But so the tuna's been on the ice for 3 weeks. But my favorite quote is, I think her name is Jane Byrne from the New York Times. She's a food writer, and she said, "The freshest tasting fish is that which is frozen right out of the water and stays that way until you thaw it out at home." And it really is the case that you're basically suspending that fish at that.
Well, especially when you vacuum pack it.
That's equally important. You've got to get the
right. So you want to catch it, you fillet it, and you vacuum pack it and freeze it that same day.
That's
And
right.
that traps all the freshness in. It doesn't have any way to go rancid if that's what you
It's
do.
all about the oxidation. So when you go into a grocery store and you see these beautiful wild salmon fillets laid out, so-called fresh or thawed, uh, the clock is ticking, right? And a lot of people will buy the one, they'll get it home, maybe they'll take them a day or two to cook it, and it just doesn't taste very good. And so you go onto our website and look at we've got over 2,000 reviews, and people just can't believe how good fish can taste if it's well cared for. So that's really our job, is to start out with the very best fish, package it perfectly, and deliver it, and then it's going to taste
and
good.
I do this every summer. Most people can't do this. I take my boys up to Alaska. We go fishing. I do what you do. Your company does. We catch it. We fillet it. We vacuum pack it. We freeze it the same day, and it's 6 months later. It's delicious. I mean, so there's that. For me, to buy it in the store would always be a disappointment.
Yes.
Compared to what you can find if you get good quality in the way that should be properly prepared.
We have an employee who was a meat and seafood manager in a grocery store many years ago, and he talked about how most people running those departments just hate the seafood because there's so much waste. It goes bad so fast. He said they bought these little, bacteria detectors to put on the fish to try to be proactive and monitor when they were going bad. He said they went bad so fast they got rid of them, and that they were actually instructed to soak the fillets in buttermilk to try to get an extra day out of them. So it's a lot
solution. Yeah.
And
what for preparing? What suggestions do you have when they go to thaw out their fish? They're going to cook it. Let's talk about how to make that fish taste delicious so they get all the nutritious health benefits and they do a better job of serving it to their family and friends.
I would happy to do that, because that is a big challenge. A lot of people will buy fish and then they'll way overcook it, and then it's like shoe leather, and then they don't like fish. Another reason that they don't like seafood. But you cook it properly, the rewards are so fantastic, because it's really one of the most delicious foods. Our bodies recognize those healthy fats, and people ask me if I ever get tired of salmon. I don't. It's one of my favorite foods. I eat it all the time, and I'm not just saying that; it's true. And I've been doing that for 30 years. So, but anyway, we have some fantastic 1-minute preparation videos on our website. So I just want to put a plug in for those. But here's how I prepare our salmon. I almost all the time, I take out however many of those little frozen pouches that we've been talking about, the vacuum packed portions, out of the freezer.
1/2 pound, 1 pound portion, something like that.
Come home from work. I don't take them out the night before or even the morning before. I wait till I'm ready to, we're going to eat here in an hour.
Right.
Take them out of the freezer, put them in a bowl of cool water, still in the plastic package, and they thaw in 20 or 30 minutes. So now you take them out of the package and you just pat them dry, put a little olive oil, and any seasoning that you like. We have a wonderful a couple of organic marinades that are really popular. But I mean, if the fish is good, a little salt and pepper is really all it takes. And then anything else you want to add. Right. I'm sure you've got your favorite recipe, which I'd love to hear. But so once you do that,
I'll share it in a second.
So I've got, say, 2 portions, one for my wife and Carl and I, and I put them in an iron skillet. I stick them under the broiler for 8 minutes, and that's it. I take them out. They're cooked to perfection. Of course, it depends on the type of fish and how thick it is.
Right. But that's probably about a 3/4 of an inch fillet thickness. 8 minutes.
3/4 to 1 inch. 8 minutes is what I use for king salmon. We have some really incredible king salmon, but so sockeye maybe 5 minutes or 6 minutes. But how much easier can it be? It goes from the freezer into the pan onto your plate in like 30 to 40 minutes. It's cooked to perfection, and really it's all a matter of what kind of seasonings you want to use. But the real secret, 2 things: brush it with some olive oil, kind of keep it moist, protect it from drying out, and then whatever, don't overcook it. So just experiment.
So I've got a little caveat to that. I do almost the exact same thing. So for all those health benefits, for all the flavor, I love to I pull it out of the freezer. It's in my vacuum pack pocket, just like yours. I soak it in water for about 15 to 20 minutes until I feel it and it's no longer frozen. Won't
Hmm.
cook evenly if it's frozen. You can't. It's a bad idea to cook it frozen. Let it thaw out first. And you can even rerun water on it a couple times if you want to. That'll speed
Sure.
the process up if you're in a hurry. I take it out. I rinse it. Now here's something, especially if I'm going to grill it. When you're broiling it, baking it, you don't have this issue of heterocyclic amines. But if one thing people may have heard of for heterocyclic amines, when you cook something on a grill, the fat drips, hits that heat and covers them. That's associated with cancer risk, and we can get rid of almost all of that with a quick acidic marinade. I love orange juice. You can use buttermilk. So I usually grill mine most of the time. Sometimes I'll do it like you did, just broil it because it's so easy inside. But I'll usually grill mine, and so I will soak it in orange juice, and it actually helps with freshness. Usually it's really fresh, but I think that's always a good hint. You can marinate in teriyaki sauce, Italian vinaigrette, anything like that. Buttermilk, anything that's acidic, and then exactly the same, 8 to 10 minutes under the broiler on the grill, and we're set.
It's
Usually,
so easy. I just say apply heat, not too much. You can do it on a stove top or grill. Planking. Do you ever do planking?
We do, yeah, we do have some alder plank. Sometimes we'll put on there, but usually I'm just looking for a nice 450 degree temperature, and boom, it's done and ready. And I think that really helps. My favorite spices are a tiny bit of salt and pepper. I like dill. Sometimes I will put really thin lemon slices on it, just some variety. I'll even put a little paprika or chili spice on it to give it some, heat once in a while. So, but for me, it's such a great food, so good for our health, and so many benefits that go with it.
We have a quote on our website we came across a few years ago, and it is that the National Academy of Science has identified, it's probably more now, but at that time, the National Academy of Sciences had identified 60 different chronic health conditions related to omega-3 deficiency. Mental health issues, skin issues, pretty much, well, it goes back to my geneticist friend. Every cell in the body needs those. And so when they're deficient, you get all these different ways that it can manifest
Right.
adversely. And
Now, we talked about salmon in detail for good reason, but let's cover some other, seafood items out there. Like, how about halibut? And you and I have talked. I'm fair to say you and I have been at medical meetings together, conferences. I've been speaking. You were there. So we've had a chance to talk professionally before. How about the size on halibut? What's the kind of upper size limit you like and that you recommend people get?
This is one of the, we talked earlier about the size of the mouth and where they're from and all that, but there's another factor, and that is, how long they live.
Right.
Some species can live decades. Halibut can live 50, 60 years, and I caught a 250-pound halibut one time. And at that time, whole purity issue wasn't on my radar, so I enjoyed it. But we source halibut that are 25 pounds and under.
Perfect.
So these are small.
Yeah, they're small.
Every boat. It's not like we're targeting the little ones. They're in every boatload. And the interesting thing is that most processors don't want the little ones. They're just not. They don't yield very much.
They're more work, but the little ones taste better.
Yes, and then we have.
And they have less mercury, so their taste. So I really like that you guys are looking for something less than 25 pounds, because that means less mercury. And from my perspective, they're a lot more tender and a lot funner to cook.
And we touched on tuna earlier, and I just have to say that tuna gets kind of a bad rap, I think, because you have 600-pound tuna and you have 10-pound tuna. You have skipjack that have relatively low mercury levels, and you've got these bluefin that have.
Well, skipjack are probably your best choice, right? Those are the smallest ones out there.
We have one fisherman that we've used ever since the beginning. His name is Paul Hill, and he's got a tuna troll boat. He goes out here in the North Pacific, and he comes in, and we take, just like we take the smallest halibut, we take his smallest albacore. And the fascinating thing that we've learned over the years is not only are they dramatically lower, and they're only 2 or 3 years old. First of all, they grow very fast, and so not only are the mercury levels low, but the oil levels, the omega-3 levels, are off the charts compared to the kind of albacore you'd buy in the grocery store. And we've tested numerous times. I can share a chart with you later, but If you buy an albacore tuna in the grocery store, the mercury or the omega-3 levels are very low, almost negligible in some cases. The mercury levels are relatively high, whereas these small juvenile troll caught, hook and line caught albacore that we're buying are just the opposite. Mercury levels are very low. We do a tuna belly, we call it ventresca. One 3.5-ounce can has 7 grams of omega-3 fatty acids. And to put that in
So
perspective,
very
that's
rich.
that's a whole lot of fish oil capsules.
So yeah, that'd be like 14 of them.
So as far as the benefit versus risk, when you're buying conventional albacore in the grocery store, high risk, low benefit. But if you're selective, and there are other sources of this type of tuna, but we really specialize in. We just goes back to we buy what we want to eat and what we want to feed our kids, and that's
Now another source of omega-3, these long-chain seafood omega-3, most people don't think about are shellfish, right? Mussels, oysters, clams.
Yes, they're very, very good sources. Plus all the other micronutrients that, we talk a lot about the fats, but there are a lot of micronutrients that are missing from
Plankton, minerals you get from these. So those are also
selenium, magnesium, all these micronutrients that are missing from, terrestrial food.
and selenium's a factor here. I'm glad you brought that up. So why don't you talk about the relationship between selenium content and health here?
Well, there are many different sources of methylmercury. I was just corresponding with another fellow who he talks to a lot of people about the mercury in seafood, but he never talks about the fact that eating fish and getting a trace level of mercury is a whole lot different than methylmercury you might be getting from some kind of industrial source or dental amalgams because the big reason is that seafood is also a great source of selenium. And selenium is something that every single one of our cells requires to be healthy.
Right, very important mineral, lowers cancer risk in some studies, helps, many aspects of aging are associated
with. One
with.
of the things that makes methylmercury, so potentially toxic is that it binds. It has an incredibly strong binding affinity with selenium. And so it gets into cells, it locks up the selenium, which is no longer available to the cell. The thing about seafood is it may have a trace level of methylmercury, but it's got relatively huge levels of selenium, far more than the mercury. So this explains why you can have populations that eat 15 times more fish than Americans do, and they're not the sickest people on the planet. They're the healthiest.
Right.
Harvard last year did a social wellness index, and they ranked countries around the world. There was one section of it was about health and wellness, and they looked at longevity, all these different factors. And Japan ranked number 1, and the U.S. ranked a dismal 70th. It was amazing. And so I point to Japan and of course there are other things going on there. They generally get more exercise than we do, and they don't eat as many processed foods, and so it's not just.
But they eat a lot more seafood.
They do, and so if seafood was really hazardous, I don't think you'd see them be. And then not only there, but other countries, where they eat a lot of seafood, they're generally the healthiest.
So, what would you like to summarize and emphasize here from what we've talked about so far? What are the key points you want to make sure you get to hammer home so that people have the opportunity to improve their health and get delicious food at the same time?
Well, number 1 is just eat more seafood. If you're not eating it, if you think that you don't like seafood, give it another try, because seafood can be one of the most delicious foods out there. But I'm the first to admit that there's a lot of bad seafood out there. I mean, oftentimes I'll make a point of going to seafood restaurants when I travel around the country. And I was just in Toronto a few weeks ago, and I ordered a tuna niçoise salad. It was so foul that I had to send it back. And I'd say 50% of the time the seafood that I get is not very good. And but anyway, I keep trying. That's what
And there are different kinds. If you don't like one fish, if you don't like salmon, you might like halibut, or there's a really good chance you'll like the mussels or oysters or something else.
Yeah, another interesting thing. We touched on farm seafood earlier, and the shellfish is always great if it's been well cared for. farm tilapia, catfish, shrimp, you generally want to avoid those. It's not that they're not so, the tilapia and the catfish are okay from an environmental standpoint because they're raised on land generally, but they're fed grains. And so they've got a lot of omega-6s and not a lot of omega-3s. Probably my favorite topic, what I spend most time trying to convey to people, because I think it's really one of the most critical things, and that is to develop an awareness about the omega-3s versus the omega-6s. And as you know, Dr. Masley, the standard American diet is just saturated with these pro-inflammatory omega-6s.
Right.
And it's not enough just to eat omega-3, take your fish oil or eat your salmon once a week. You've got to also lower those omega-6s.
But that's not just in seafood. Even with land animal protein, if you're eating beef, if you're eating corn-fed, soy and corn-fed beef, it's going to be very high in omega-6 and very inflammatory. If you're eating grass-fed beef, it won't be nearly as beneficial as seafood, but at least it'd be neutral.
That's right, exactly. So, I'd just like to let people know about Vital Choice.
So if people want to get more information, tell us about your website, your newsletter. How can people get more information if they would like good choices to help their health?
Well, we've been passionate about education for a long time. I sometimes feel like we sell seafood on the side, and we're really about education. We brought on Craig Weatherby almost after 10 years ago or so, and I think he's published over 1,000 science-based articles. And so we've got an incredible archive of great science-based articles. We've got this newsletter we send out every week, and not only breaking news in the health and wellness field, breaking news about sustainable issues, but a lot of great recipes and information about products. And our website is just really a very rich source. You can spend a lot of time digging around there and learning everything there is to know about seafood. And as I mentioned earlier,
let's hear the website.
That's vitalchoice.com.
Okay, that's easy, vitalchoice.com.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much for joining today. This has been great because I would love to have more people make sure they get seafood at least 2 to 3 times a week in their diet. So that would be my goal out there. It's certainly something I aim to have, and helping them make the right choices so they enjoy it and they get the nutritional benefit at the same time. So I'm so glad you were able to join us here today. So I really hope you've enjoyed this. If you would like more information, if you'd like to save this talk and share it with friends, or if you missed another presenter, click on that banner below so you can have access to all our information and you can save this library for time to come. Thank you again for joining the Healthy Heart Summit, and I'm Dr. Stephen Masley.